Hi, my name is Christian Maynard, and today we'll be taking a look at Megyn Kelly's discussion with Alex. This individual has spoken on and has written a book around cannabis entitled Tell Your Children, which is a nod to the original title for Reefer Madness, a propaganda film from 1936, 1937 area.
You've been sounding the alarm on marijuana for a long time now. And when these cases keep coming up of these shooters and everybody says, what can we do? It's a free country, you know, like people, you can't, like what? Okay, the Republicans say fortify the soft targets and we need more mental health. And the Democrats say seize all the guns. And you're over there jumping up and down going, hello, hello, hello. I see a common theme in virtually all of these. Would somebody please listen to me? And that is one of the many reasons I wanted to have you on. So you pick it up from there.
Well, sure. I mean, so look, it's interesting because Tell Your Children came out in
So let's go a little bit into his background. Alex has recently commented on the incident involving Renee Good and the ICE officer, stating ICE has the right to be there. Renee Good chose to break the law. She needed to accept being arrested. Instead, she forced a man with a gun into a split-second choice. In addition, in November 2024, he's commented on George Floyd, suggesting it was a overdose. Let's continue.
Tell Your Children came out in 2019, the beginning of 2019, and the left, they jumped it, right? They hated the book. They hated the science. They said I was, I didn't know what I was talking about. I was making things up.
Why are you calling it the left in this incident? It's not the left. It's just scientists.
I think the book is its own best evidence. It's...
Let's talk about his book. One Guardian article points out that there's a bunch of experts that signed on to an open letter. So 75 scholars and clinicians signed an open letter joining a chorus of disagreement with Berenson by arguing that establishing marijuana as a causal link to violence at the individual level is both theoretical and empirically problematic. He replied, arguing that it attracted only a handful of signatures from MDs and almost no psychiatrists who are on the front lines of treating psychosis and severe mental illness. Now, Berenson focuses on association, and he often makes the leap to a causation argument, whereas the evidence, even those that he draws on, they often point out and caution against causation arguments for cannabis to psychosis. In fact, one of the 2010 review articles declared the contentious issue of whether cannabis use can cause serious psychotic disorders that would not otherwise have occurred cannot be answered from the existing data. In that open letter, researchers had said, weighted against the harms of prohibition, including the criminalization of millions of people, overwhelmingly black and brown, and the devastating collateral consequences of criminal justice involvement, legalization is the less harmful approach. Let's continue.
It's an accumulation of studies that were done really over the last 30 years and talking to psychiatrists and talking to people with mental illness and their families about that cannabis, marijuana, which, a lot of people just use pure THC now, they use vapes, that certainly if you use that over time, and if you use a lot of it, and unfortunately, if you start when you're in your teens, your early teens especially, you're at higher risk for developing severe mental illness. Now, there's a lot of other issues around.
Who is advocating for teen use here? I do not see that position as a rallying cry in the public. In fact, I would argue that cannabis legalization is actually useful for reducing teen use. When you legalize it, you are controlling the supply more, and the evidence backs this up. Overall, the trends in past year use for 8th, 10th, and 12th graders has gone down recently, not up. Research that has examined cannabis legalization has often found decreases, at least for 8th and 10th graders. Let's continue.
Marijuana, which, a lot of people just use pure THC now, they use vapes, that certainly if you use that over time, And if you use a lot of it, and unfortunately, if you start when you're in your teens, your early teens especially, you're at higher risk for developing severe mental illness. Now, there's a lot of other issues around cannabis, but that was the one that I focused on in the book, because to me, that's the one that you can't really fix, right? And a permanent psychotic disorder, schizophrenia in particular, that's not something I would wish on anybody. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It ruins people's lives. It destroys families. It's very difficult societally. So when people talk, well, marijuana, maybe it makes people fat, or it makes them lazy, or it kind of,
Where is this? This seems like a sidebar, and an incorrect one at that. Research has indicated that physical activity actually goes up in places that have legalized it, or even among studies that have looked at users and non-users. Physical activity tends to be higher among users. Let's continue.
Their motivation, all those things are pretty clearly true too. But to me, the problem that has the greatest societal impact is this issue of psychosis. And it's also very, very clear, and I don't think anybody would disagree with this, that psychosis is a risk factor in violence, okay?
Okay, so psychosis is a concern. It is a pretty major concern. How many people are being affected by this? According to the NIH, anywhere from 15 to 100 people out of 100,000 are affected by psychosis. Let's continue.
Violence, okay? And it's a risk factor in two particularly bad kinds of violence. The first kind is violence against essentially innocent family members. So people, the crimes where the cops say, we don't understand why this happened, or the neighbors say, we don't understand why this happened. This 18-year-old kid slaughtered his family in their sleep. And
again, no state that has legalized cannabis allows an 18-year-old to go purchase cannabis.
And we just don't get it. That's almost always psychosis driven. And when I say almost always, I mean almost always. And so that's one kind. And then the other kind is the kind that you were mentioning at the beginning, which is crimes against strangers. And those can be stabbings, they can be shootings, but crimes where, once again, it doesn't seem like there's any sense to it. And the reason.
Okay, so bases of the claim here seemingly is a cannabis causes psychosis, psychosis causes crime, right? Like that seems like the overall argument of this claim. Now, does cannabis legalization have associations with psychosis? Sure, yes. Much of the evidence would suggest that the earlier you use cannabis, the higher your risk factor is. However, let's just talk about cannabis and crime right now. Does cannabis lead to crime? No. Some evidence suggests decreases potentially, but at a minimum, it doesn't appear to increase it. And if it does, it may be a very temporary effect, at least for the first year, is where the evidence has suggested thus far. Moreover, this isn't just a recent study. Even studies back in the day suggested this. Even the LaGuardia Commission back in the 40s suggested that cannabis was not associated with major crimes or juvenile delinquency. Moreover, if cannabis had this profound effect to cause so much violence, so much crime, we would see in the numbers, right? Well, crime has decreased in recent years, especially since the 90s and even since the 70s. Let's continue.
There is no sense to it. It's being driven by something inside this person, voices, a feeling that they almost cannot control, even if they know it's wrong. And so then there'll be a big legal fight afterwards about should this person go to a psychiatric forensic hospital for the rest of their lives? Should they be in prison? But it's too late at that point. The damage has been done. So that's what I wrote about in Tell Your Children. And I will say that in the last 7 years, and the book came out basically 7 years ago to the day, the evidence has only mounted. And I would say even people on the left, and they probably still think that.
Who is the left for cannabis? Like, cannabis is such a bipartisan issue. What is the left when it comes to cannabis? What is the right when it comes to cannabis? I am generally curious at what that looks like. My current assumption would be the left wants co-ops and the right wants big business, but you tell me, because I don't understand what the left and right on cannabis legalization is.
Cannabis should be legal, that THC should be legal. They don't really dispute this anymore. And that's why I'm sort of so upset by what the president did last month, because I think there's just so much evidence that this is a mistake societally. And I think, look, this is not his issue. He's got tons of other things to worry about. And he's got some people giving him a lot of money and whispering in his ear, hey, this is not a bad thing. And, it's just not, I doubt that.
Trump did take quite a bit of money from cannabis lobbying groups. I believe Trulieve might be the largest one that donated to him. Let's continue.
It's not, I doubt that he is up on the ins and outs of this, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, President Trump's never smoked a joint in his life.
Exactly.
He's also a known teetotaler.
Yeah, he's not a big pot pusher. I'm sure you're right. He's got some constituency that really wanted it, and he figured, like a lot of people do, medical marijuana.
Some constituency, 70% of Americans are supportive of cannabis legalization at this point.
Marijuana, that's good. Like a lot of people like it. It brings comfort to cancer victims. Why would I not make that easier for suffering people to get? And the answer to that is what?
Well, so unfortunately, when you actually look at cannabis and THC in clinical trials, for example, as everybody knows, we've had a terrible opioid epidemic in the United States the last 20 or 25 years.
Which has recently decreased in the last couple of years.
And people thought, hey, if we legalize cannabis, it will lead to less opioid use.
Which it has. Well, there's several studies that have looked at the introduction of legalization and whether that has led to an increase or decrease in opioid use. And by and large, it hasn't increased it. And if anything, there are patients that will substitute and use fewer opioid pain medicines and in favor of cannabis, which I think most people would agree that cannabis is less life-altering.
Fortunately, when you actually study this, you don't see very good substitution. What you see is that people who use cannabis often continue to use opioids. Sometimes they use more opioids. They don't really.
I don't think this person has read the studies, at least not the ones I have read on this.
To say that their pain levels have gone down. It turns out that, unfortunately in general, and this is true of cannabis, it's true of opioids, it's true of other painkillers, getting lasting pain relief from any drug is really difficult to do. Over time, your body adapts to it, and you ultimately oftentimes have just as much pain as you did before, plus you have whatever the negative side effects of the drug use were.
As opposed to the opiate side effects.
And look, if somebody has cancer and they're a few months from death, if somebody, is terminally ill in some other way, they have ALS, whatever it is they might have, and a little bit of whether it's cannabis or opioids or something else is going to relieve their pain, I don't think any of us would deny them that. That is not what the industry is selling to. They're selling to young people. They're selling large amounts of cannabis to people who are physically healthy, usually, at least when they start using. And that's where they make their money. This is all a sideshow. And, one thing, the proof of this, by the way, is that so the industry, if you look at the stocks, because some of these are publicly traded companies, they went up before the president signed this order telling the DEA to deschedule cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, the stocks have gone up and down on this. Compared to a year ago, the stock is up. However, if you put for 5 years, the stock is down still. So I don't know, depending on how you zoom into it.
You schedule it from 1 to 3, as you said. Since then, the stocks have actually gone down. And the reason is that the order actually is crafted in a way the industry doesn't like, because it's so focused on medical marijuana. And people have realized, hey, you know what? Because so much of our sales are just recreational, this doesn't actually help us that much.
Good. So the medical marijuana thing, it is, I take your point that it's really it may not be helping people as much as they represent to us. But I did see something interesting about young people recently, and it seems directly linked to this. The alcohol sales present day, especially for young people, but across the board, are way down. They're lower than they've been in decades. And that's...
I mean, yeah, it's a carcinogen. It's not great for you. For 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, uses drop tremendously.
The good news, nobody would say alcohol is good for you, though it can be a social lubricant. In that way, it is good for very introverted people. Okay, whatever. But the cannabis sales may be replacing that. I didn't see a corresponding chart, but the concern is that a lot of those young people in particular are instead turning to like gummies. And that's not good news.
No, it's not. And this idea that cannabis is way safer than alcohol is demonstrably untrue. So here's what I say. And people say in the cannabis business, well, nobody ever died of smoking too much pot. And it is true. Nobody ever died, or, maybe there's a case of, a 5-year-old who ate a ton of gummies and had a seizure and died. It's very rare. We'd all agree about that. Okay. Whereas if you drink too much alcohol, your liver can fail. You can die. But that does not mean that cannabis overall isn't dangerous. And it's dangerous in some of the same ways that alcohol is, meaning it can cause traffic accidents. It causes.
Okay, yeah, it can cause traffic accidents, and it's not advisable to drive while impaired under the influence of anything. However, okay, if this is a substitution effect, if people are not consuming alcohol but consuming cannabis instead, seemingly because cannabis is not as impairing, usually not as impairing, I want to qualify, traffic incidents would decrease. Now, I have seen studies where some note a small increase in those who use cannabis and alcohol, and that's pretty destructive in terms of impairment while driving. But by and large, the impairment for cannabis tends to be quite a bit lower than that of alcohol.
Violence, as we said, it's associated with high risk of suicide. It's associated with mental illness. It also, increasingly, people are realizing, cardiologists have done a lot of work, it's associated with heart attacks, believe it or not. And one reason we haven't seen that as much as we would have, as much as we have, well, we've seen some of it. We're likely to see more of it. But the reason kids and young people are obviously very low risk from heart attacks, but it does increase that risk, it seems to. So cannabis is not risk-free. I would say overall, it's kind of, if you look at all the risks together, it's roughly the same physical and psychiatric risk as alcohol. So then people say, well, okay, but alcohol's legal, cannabis isn't. And to me, that is the best argument for.
So where's your energy for getting rid of alcohol? If you see them as the same level of danger, put your energy into getting rid of alcohol, if that is your belief here.
Legalizing cannabis, but it's not a good enough one, and here's why. We don't have to legalize cannabis. We're choosing to do this. The US and Canada are basically.
You could make the same argument for we don't have to keep alcohol legalized. Like, where's your consistency there?
The two countries that have chosen to do this. The rest of the world is not following along. And even a country like Germany, where they did move actually to legalize, they've now moved away from that. Netherlands and Amsterdam, same thing. They are not moving further around or further down the drug legalization road.
Yeah, and other countries have experimented with this as well. You got Thailand, which decriminalized cannabis, I believe back in 2022, though they are tightening up some of the rules around that. Moreover, you got Mexico, which has legalized cannabis, though they're still working out some kinks as well.
Well, how can you say that it's the same danger as alcohol? Because alcohol, you can have 3 glasses of wine over the course of a week and you don't have any risk of psychosis or, like that. It seems like there are millions of Americans who drink alcohol and they don't have any of those issues that you listed.
Wow. Are you getting it? What about the millions of cannabis users? Where's this same energy, Megyn?
The equivalent of that would be somebody who, let's say, takes one small gummy a week or, a couple a week to try to sleep. Okay. If that's your only use of cannabis, are your, risks of becoming psychotic very low? Yes, they're very low. They're not zero, but they're very low. The problem is cannabis is addictive, okay? Cannabis is addictive. The evidence actually is that it's more psychologically addictive than alcohol. Less physically addictive, more psychologically addictive. So when we open this to 18-year-olds and we say it's medicine.
Who is opening it to 18-year-olds? What state? What state has legalized and said 18-year-olds come on in? You might say that about international places such as Canada. Sure. But what states? What states in the US have allowed 18 to purchase cannabis from a dispensary?
That encourages them to use in a way that gets them in trouble. I mean, look, almost any drug, if you use it just once in your life, the risks of terrible side effects are low. I mean, obviously, fentanyl and some of the opioids, that's less true. But the problem isn't the person who's able to use once or a handful of times and stop. The problem is that drugs have their own logic, okay? And that's true of cannabis, it's true of alcohol, it's true of other drugs. And that logic is one word, Megyn, it's more. And so as a society, when we think about drug use, we have to think about discouraging drug use across the board. And
the United States has not done a great job at that. The United States is the #1 drug-using society rate-wise across the board. And then it's Canada. Just like baseball, drug use seems like it's an American pastime.
And when we legalize cannabis, we're doing exactly the opposite of that. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that the US and Canada, which are, again, the two countries where this movement has gone the furthest, are the two countries that have the worst problem with opioids. I think there's a bigger issue here that I would like to write another book about, and I'm searching to find the time to do that, which is just about sort of the US attitude in general towards drug use and drug abuse. And I think we are on a horrible path.
Can you talk about the amount of THC that's in your average joint now versus in 1975?
Sure, this is a great point. So 50 years ago, if you smoked a joint, it had a few milligrams of THC in it. Now it might have 100 milligrams of THC in it. The reason is that the industry has gotten really, really good at making what they call flower, herbal cannabis.
Yes, this is evidenced by DEA potency, seizures of cannabis. THC potency has gone up. However, I want to make a mention that not all the labels at a cannabis store, cannabis dispensary are accurate. Instead, these labels tend to be overinflated, so they may not be as high as you think they are.
A lot stronger. So it used to be, let's say, 1 to 3% THC. Now you couldn't sell that in a store. You'd be laughed out of the store. It's mostly 20 to 30%.
Very true.
THC, but it's not like joints have gotten smaller. So it's just much, much easier to consume a ton of THC than it used to be. The other issue is that a lot of people don't even use flower cannabis anymore. They just vape. So that's basically just ingesting a chemical, either inhaling it.
It does seem like much of that might be for the pure fact of it's not as smelly, it's less nuisance, it's easier, quicker, simpler, less going on.
Eating it in a brownie, possibly literally putting a little tincture on your tongue. That's just pure THC. And the idea, one of the things that people who use cannabis say is, oh, it's a plant, it's natural. This stuff is no more natural than anything else that comes out of a lab. It's extracted from the plant, and it's, in some cases, actually, it's chemically altered in the extraction. So the idea that this is a natural substance is not true either.
Overall, this is not a take that I'm entirely surprised by. Anti-cannabis individuals tend to hyper-focus on the psychosis angle, mental illness, whereas this affects very few people. Not to say that this is without consequences or without concern or does not merit a discussion. These energies tend to not be reflected in their concern around the harms of current anti-cannabis drug policies in the US, such as the mass incarceration of individuals for relatively minor crimes, the harms and destruction that has caused families, such as separation of mother, fathers, and spouses from one another, and the mental illness that can occur through poor conditions in many of our states, jails, and prisons. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share the video. Let me know what you'd like to see in the future. As always, have a great day.